Welcome to The Teacher's Story. I'm Jackie Scully. This is a podcast to elevate teacher voice. In this program, you will hear teachers sharing their journey into this profession and their ideas for education. I'm kicking it off Teacher Appreciation Week, which starts May 2nd. This is about honest, vulnerable, inspiring storytelling. It's a time and a space for teachers to share their ideas for the future of education. Teachers are beautiful beings who give their heart and soul to their community. They're innovators, they're inspirational, not only to children, but to the people around them. And they deserve to share their voice. So welcome to The Teacher's Story. Enjoy. Hi, welcome to The Teacher's Story. This is Jackie Scully, and today we have Pablo Muñoz with us. He is a former superintendent with 30 years in public education, both as a teacher and administrator, and a best-selling author of The Leader's Algorithm, How a Personal Theory of Action Transforms Your Life, Work, and Relationships. So excited to have you on today. I think especially coming from the background of both educator and administrator. I've had a couple administrators on, but not many. So this will be a great, enlightening conversation. So thank you for coming on the show.
Jackie, thank you for having me.
So my first question for you is, what inspired you to get into education?
Yeah, there's actually a pretty interesting and odd story around that. When I went off to college, and if I had to do it over again, I may have. So I wanted to be an engineer, and I actually wanted to be a civil engineer. And at the same time, I'm a baseball pitching recruit, so I'm getting recruited by a couple of universities. And so I get into some and I don't get into others, and I get waitlisted. And ultimately I choose to go to Yale, and they don't have civil engineering. At the time, I think they definitely had mechanical because that's where I started. And then they may have had chemical and probably electrical. And so they didn't have civil. So I said, I guess the closest thing will be mechanical. And I hated it. And so if I wanted to be a civil engineer, I probably should have gone to Columbia or to Rutgers School of Engineering. And maybe today we wouldn't be talking because I would be an engineer. But how that happens was I was lost for a little bit. I ended up deciding to major in psychology. Then I was at Yale. The way Yale school is structured for the undergraduate experience is that once you become a sophomore, there are some freshmen that start off this way, but once you become a sophomore, you're housed in what they call residential college. And so that ends up being kind of your dorm, but they don't call it dorms. And there's classes in there in the dining hall. So I had just gone to class. I went to lunch at the dining hall, and this gentleman approaches me, and I had seen him before. He kind of just bounces around, this really tall gentleman, bubbly, great energy. And he comes up to me, goes, "Hey, can I sit and have lunch with you?" And I go, "Sure." I was sitting there by myself, and he just launches into it. And I'm Herb Hennessy, and what's your name? I'm Pablo. And what year are you? I'm a junior. And have you ever thought about teaching? And I go, you know what? I did. I said, last time I thought about teaching was my senior year in high school. I was sitting in an advanced placement calculus class, and I said to myself, "Oh man, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way." And that was the last time I thought about thinking.
That's funny.
I'm sorry, about teaching. Probably the next time probably was when I was practicing baseball, and I forget what year I was. We were indoors, so we weren't. Well, New Haven, it was probably snow on the ground, so we weren't outside. It was probably January or February, so we hadn't gotten on spring break, but we were practicing indoors. And somebody had a younger kid, and he wanted to pitch, and he started to throw off the mound, and I was looking at his mechanics, and they weren't quite right. So I went up to him and I started helping him with his mechanics. So that was kind of my entree to coaching plus teaching how to pitch. So those were the two times that I had thought about it. But then Herb approached me, and so who is Herb Hennessy, right? So Herb Hennessy ends up being the supervisor of social studies in the New Haven public schools. And I would eventually find out that he had received his master's degree from Yale. And for some, I don't know the system. He was like a fellow, and he would just roam the dining room. And I think he was just kind of looking to make friends and find people that wanted to be teachers. So I said, you know what? That sounds like an interesting idea. So he ended up setting up an appointment with me with the person that was in charge of the teacher preparation program at Yale. Her name was Edith McMullen. And the funny thing was that Edith McMullen was the spouse of, at the time, they had a different name. So I'll use the current name because there's bad association with both the college that I was in, plus the names that they used to use. So he was the kind of the head of the college, which was in charge of the social life of that particular college. And each college had a head of college, and each college had a dean that dealt with the academics of those students. And she was the spouse of the head of the college. But her work day so I would see her all the time. I didn't realize she was in the teacher preparation program. So eventually I would have a meeting with her. And fortunate enough, because I was majoring in psychology, a lot of the prerequisites to become a social studies teacher in the state of Connecticut, I had already been knocking off. And then we kind of looked at my transcript and look at what the certification requirements were for Connecticut. And then she told me, well, you need to take these courses. And also the way the math was working out. One summer, I had to take a political science class back in New Jersey, just so that I could get all the courses and the credits in to graduate in the 4 years. So I started kind of late, because usually you start the fall of junior year. I started the spring of junior year. I student taught in the spring of my senior year at Wilbur Cross High School in New Haven. And I also ended up volunteering as the baseball coach, as an assistant baseball coach for Wilbur Cross High School. So that's how I became a teacher. And then, interesting enough, Edith made all of us put together something a little bit larger than a resume. She used to call it a dossier. So I forget all the pieces that were in there. And she said, that there are people coming on campus for interviews, and I want you to come this day at this time. But she didn't tell me who was interviewing and who was coming. And so I show up, and then she says, okay, let me introduce you to the person that's conducting interviews. And the gentleman's name ends up being Tom Ficara. And Tom Ficara ends up being the director of human resources for the Elizabeth Public Schools, my hometown.
Wow.
So I end up getting recruited to go back home by way of a Yale interview. So just some they had an initiative where they started to go to Ivy League colleges looking to try to get teachers. And that's how he found me. I mean, ultimately I may have applied. It kind of set Herb off. Not much can get Herb upset. He was like this fun, jolly guy. And even when he told me this story that he was upset, he was still laughing, right? Because he wanted me to be a teacher in New Haven.
He was recruiting you.
Yeah, but Edie sent me off, set up to Elizabeth, and I ended up going home, and that's where my career started. So I ended up in teaching kind of by chance. I ended up loving it, and now I'm loving it all over again, because since I retired from the superintendency, I'm an adjunct professor at Lehigh University. So I'm in the educational leadership department, and I'm teaching leading and managing change. I teach in the fall, and in the spring, I teach a course called School District Resource Management. And also this spring, I'm teaching a course called diversity and multicultural perspectives. And so my Mondays are always full of joy because I love being in the classroom. The classroom is largely discussion based, and I love the energy. I break them up into groups, and the way I structure the course is that they have to read and write to be prepared to discuss in class. And they actually, whatever they read, they also have to teach it to somebody before they come to class. So I use some of Hattie's research on how to best learn. And so that's how I became a teacher. That's how I ended up back in my hometown. And now I'm teaching again, which is a lot more fun than running than being a superintendent of schools. I guess some
Yeah.
people loved
I'm definitely going to ask about that.
the politics and the energy around politicians and newspapers and parents and dealing the problem solving I love, but just the endless
Yes.
level of stress of the superintendency
Oh,
was a
for
bit
sure.
much.
You're the
But
face of the whole school district. So you
but
get
that's
everything.
but a long answer to a very simple question. How did I become a teacher?
I love it.
Herb found me in the dining hall eating, and you could almost, it didn't really happen this way. You could almost envision him grabbing me by my ear and dragging me over to Edie's office and saying, "Hey, I found a teacher for you." He should have gone one step further and say, "And by the way, he's going to work for the New Haven Public Schools, so don't go sending him off anywhere else." But that's how I became a teacher.
That's funny. I love these stories. There's only been a few on that have this story of that was not their track and it just kind of like happened by chance and it didn't feel like, all right, I guess this is what I'm going to do. Like it didn't seem like that like energized, but then it just kind of became like your part of your path and like it just felt natural. And I was thinking of where you're teaching now at Lehigh. Isn't that a big engineering school as well?
I think they
It just coming
I
back to
do
your
yes
engineering
I
back.
yeah no, I probably would have some negative reactions or I don't know. Yes, I do believe they have a College of Engineering.
Yeah,
But
I
being
just
an
remember that.
adjunct, I kind of just drive there for my day, and
Yeah,
then I come back. So it's kind of a 3-hour round trip
yeah, yeah,
venture every Monday to teach a class. So yeah, I believe definitely have people in computer science, because that seems to
yeah.
be a big thing. And
It's a
the
great
building I
school.
teach, yeah, it is. The students are fantastic. And obviously I'm not teaching the undergrads, I'm teaching the graduate students. So they're more senior, more mature
Mm,
in many ways. But they're all very talented. So,
yeah,
reading their papers are time consuming, but easy reads, because they know how to write very well, and get their ideas across on paper. So
yeah. I want to get into that because I think when we talk about, especially towards the end, like with your work, but just I always like to talk about like where is education going and what do we really need to be doing to kind of elevate it into now like really the quarter of the 21st century when we talk about 21st century learning. But I think teacher preparation and how you are in the college level is really important to see like how those classes and courses are kind of getting people ready for entering education. But before that, I'd like to learn more about teaching roles into superintendent or like that kind of pathway. What led you into administration and kind of what you saw as like the difference between the two or what you kind of learned in moving into, the administration role from teaching. If you can share a little bit about that.
yeah, so that also was kind of a little bit by chance as well. um yeah, the first thought I ever had about becoming an administrator did happen when I was in college. So one of the opportunities that, well, not opportunity, one of the requirements when you're going through the teacher preparation program is you take this class, which is largely observational. right? You go to the school and you make your way around the building, you go into classrooms and you just keep a journal and keep on watching. And that ends up being kind of the experience. And I think we had to do that for 2 terms. And one day I came back to Edie and I said, and it must have been because I had a conversation with someone about the school principal. I said, you know what, I think I may want to be a principal someday. And she told me, yeah, I think that's a good idea for you. Obviously, let's start with teaching and eventually we'll think about it. So that was kind of the first time I thought about becoming an administrator. The next time I thought about it, actually, and I haven't really shared the story, but let's have fun and share it. I was teaching and I was coaching baseball, and a classmate of mine from high school is also now teaching. And I ran into her and she told me she had started her master's degree in educational administration. And I said, oh my, oh, well, she started it. Maybe it's time for me to start it. So I ended up, that kind of motivated me to start to look around, to think about going back to graduate school to get my master's degree in educational administration, because obviously you and your guests know that our world is governed by certificates, and having the proper certificate at least allows you to hold the job. And so that was kind of the first event that happened. The next event happened where I was thinking about where to apply. And I was working in Elizabeth, and right next to Elizabeth in Union, New Jersey, which are 2 towns that abut each other, is Yale University. And obviously, if we get on the highway on the New Jersey Turnpike and head southwest to New Brunswick, there's Rutgers University. So I ended up registering for a class at Rutgers. It was an introduction to instructional supervision class. And while I was taking that class, then I decided to apply. And again, by chance, Tom Ficarum took an interest in me, and he was doing his Ivy League recruiting trips. And this time, since he was going to Yale, he invited me to go with him. So we're in this car, bright and early, driving up Route 95 to New Haven, Connecticut from New Jersey. And he's asking me what I plan to do, because he thinks I should go into administration as well. So I told him, I'm thinking about, applying to Kane or Rutgers, and they're kind of near my house. And really, Kane was right, like 5 minutes away from my house, right? He goes, no, you shouldn't do that. I go, okay, what should I do? He said, you need to keep your degrees at the same level. And he said, if you have your Yale degree, you need to either apply, if I was going to stay locally and do it part-time, you need to apply to Teachers College, Columbia University, or you need to apply to UPenn's Graduate School of Education to keep your degrees at the same level. So that's when I ended up applying to Rutgers and Teachers College, Columbia University. I don't think I applied to Kane. And I ended up taking the one course, getting into Columbia, and then enrolling into Columbia. So that's me getting into administration. And then the next time, I'm letting all the secrets out of the bag. So I'm at the high school, I'm teaching, and I'm heading towards my duty, which is lunch duty. And you have to kind of imagine Elizabeth High School, right? It's a 5,000 student school.
Wow.
It's huge.
That's huge.
Right? It's huge, right? So I'm just walking, and all of a sudden the superintendent at the time is walking in the opposite direction, and we cross, and he sees me. He goes, oh, hold on, Pablo. This job is opening up. I'd like for you to apply. And so it just happened, Wow. I was like, and I went to lunch duty and did lunch duty, and then went home and thought about it. And eventually, when they posted the job, I ended up applying and getting it. So that's how I ended up becoming my first administrative job was the supervisor of social studies, which was, I was supervising the department I was working in, supervising a lot of my own former teachers. I was like 25 or 26 years old. So actually, like, lesson number one when anybody asks me is like, slow down, don't be so quick to get into administration, because I was like superintendent by the age of 35. And again, if I would have done it all, if I would have been given the chance to do it over again, I would have done it slower. I would have, instead of gone to, like, there are two routes. Tom Ficara explained to me, there's two routes for people. You can go the central office route, or you can go the school route, right? And sometimes a person can do both, but sometimes by their nature and their personality, they kind of fit either the school or the central office. And what does that mean for your listeners? So I ended up office route, which is I became a supervisor of social studies. So I was housed in the central office, and I would visit my social studies teachers at their random schools, and supervise their instruction, do their evaluations, do their annual assessments, and create the schedules, and head up curriculum design and scope and sequence. And then from there, I moved up to the director of curriculum instruction, which is I supervised all the instructional supervisors. Then I became assistant sup and then superintendent. The other route, and you can crisscross through the routes. The other route oftentimes is you become an assistant principal at a school, then a principal, and then potentially become a director of some type of domain. Or in like New Jersey loves its schools. We have like over 600 school districts. You can go from like a principal to assistant sup. And actually in New Jersey, you can go from a principal to a superintendent, because there are tiny school districts of one school or two schools where the chief school administrator is also the principal of the particular school. So I ended up taking the central office route and working my way through the years. But that's how I got into administration. And so I ended up doing like 3 years. I was supervisor for 3 years, and then the director of curriculum instruction for 3 years, and then the assistant superintendent for 3 years. And then I got my longest run, which I like to call myself a unicorn, because
it sounds like it. You definitely sound like the unicorn about public education.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you why I was unicorn, because first of all, we'll get back. Remind me to get back to being a Hispanic superintendent or a Latino superintendent. The unicorn part is that I become superintendent. I do it for 8.5 years. So I had 2 5-year contracts in New Jersey. That's how they're structured. You can get a 3, 4, or 5-year contract. So I ended up getting one renewed. And then what happened was, at the 8.5-year point, actually before that, I was getting recruited by other school districts. And then I got recruited to go from Elizabeth Public Schools to the Passaic Public Schools, which is also an urban school setting in New Jersey. Those are 2 of the largest school districts in New Jersey. And then I did Passaic for 7.5 years, and then I retired. And then I established my educational and leadership consulting company, became an adjunct professor, and also became the author of the Leader's Algorithm. But that's how I got into administration. I don't know if I answered the complete question, but let me touch on that Latino superintendent.
Yes, please.
Piece.
Yeah.
So
I'd like to get more behind the scenes also.
Well, you are actually getting a lot of behind the scenes.
Because actually, this is the first time I've had someone on that had a superintendent position. I've only ever had maybe like a principal perspective as well. So this is something I don't know about.
Yeah, keep peeling the onion back. I have a lot of stories. They're all in here. You just have to ask the right question, and they'll pop out. So I get a random call from this gentleman, and he's doing his doctorate at Rutgers. And he wants to meet with me because he wants me in his data set. And I forget what the entire subject of his dissertation was, but the line that I'm going to share is the line that kind of talks about Hispanics in the superintendency being unicorns, at least in New Jersey and other parts of the United States where there are many more opportunities and many more Hispanics that you find them. And actually, we're so many years removed from that event that you're getting more and more to fill those roles. So I say yes. I typically say no, right? I'm an introvert. I shy away from newspaper reporters. I don't want to really deal with someone's dissertation, especially if they're from outside the school district. But I call and I say yes. And I can't even tell you why. So the guy visits me. He tells me that he's doing this dissertation about Latino superintendents. And he thanked me so much. And I go, okay, no problem. You're here now. Ask your questions. But I'm curious, why are you thanking me so much? He goes, if you would have said no, I would have only had like 5 people for my data set in New Jersey, because there aren't any of you in the state. And that was like my aunt, I'm so focused on running the day-to-day schools. I don't even think about these things. And I'm working in a school district that's 70% Hispanic. So I'm seeing them all around me between parents and students and staff. And then when I go to Passaic, they're 90% Hispanic. So when he comes and tells me, when you look at the whole state of New Jersey, there's only like, he can count them on one hand. If you would have said no, my data set would have gone down by like 20%. I was like, wow, okay. Well,
Yeah.
I'm glad I took your appointment. Go
This
off
was
and
important.
go out and ask me your questions.
So, what is it like to be a superintendent for one of the largest school districts in New Jersey? Like, I mean, that role seems so huge, and you did it for so long. I mean, you're probably not going to tell me everything like your day to day, but just in general, like, what is the big parts of that role?
Hmm. For me, it was a love hate. It was a love hate type of position. And I wanted to be a superintendent from the outset, right? When I thought about becoming a school principal, having that conversation with Edie, I was really probably thinking about leading the whole organization. And it's kind of in my nature, because I was a pitcher in high school and in baseball, and captain of my high school team. So I had kind of some leadership roles and inclinations in my personality. And so for me, it ends up being love-hate, because I wanted to become the superintendent, and I was such an instructional person, right? Because I was a teacher, and you could see my track. It was supervisor of social studies, director of curriculum instruction. When I became assistant sup, I was in charge of staff development, curriculum instruction, special education, early child. I was in charge of instruction. All the way up to the superintendency. So I'm thinking, like, when I become superintendent, all right, we're going to get focused on instruction, because I was in both districts. I replaced like political transactional superintendents. And although I did focus on teaching and learning, I also had to realize that there were other things I had to deal with. And what I didn't completely realize until I got into the job was how much time was spent on labor issues and labor lawsuits and labor grievances. So I ended up spending so much time with lawyers, and it's not something that I would have expected, right? Even as an assistant sup, like when someone asked me what was your favorite job, it was assistant superintendent of schools, director of curriculum instruction, and being a teacher. Those were my favorite jobs. Assistant sup, superintendent, not so much. So it's love hate. The love part was, and it would bring me to tears at times, was, when we've made consistent progress over time and restructuring the school districts, redesigning them with policies, programs, and personnel and professional development, and my personal theory of action that maybe we'll get to a little bit later. But once we started redesigning the district and seeing the academic performance improve and seeing kids get into better colleges, and then starting to win National Blue Ribbon Awards, when I'm there doing the festivities of celebrating those events, that bring tears to my eyes. And when I get really emotional, my throat locks up and I can't speak. So those were really like the great moments, right? And then when I was in Passaic, I had this vision. Now the first vision was established by my assistant soup. I ended up being the superintendent, so I ended up taking credit for it, right? And all, take the credit and the abuse. But we ended up creating an equity goal, and I was thinking one way, and she suggested a different way. And the equity goal that we wrote was the students in the Passaic Public Schools would graduate with a career certification, 15 college credits, or both. And I said, okay, I like that. So we'll go with that as the equity goal. But then I had a larger vision. So I started talking to my high school principals, and I said, this is what we want to do, but I want you guys, and we had to set up the relationships and the contracts with the colleges. I want you to graduate students with a high school diploma and an associate's degree. So my first class, I wasn't there. I had retired in April of 2021. So the first class that graduated kids with a high school diploma and an associate's degree was that June 2021 class. There was about 12 or 13 of them. And then the next year, I think they had about 30 in 2022, and I have since stopped looking, but I wasn't there for it. But it was awesome. It was the things that we put in place to make happen. Those are the exciting things, right? Seeing kids improve academically, get into better schools, their parents are happy, providing them specialized programs with magnet schools and different opportunities of choice. Those were the exciting and happy moments. And when I get to spend time talking about teaching and learning and the instructional core, those right are up my alley. I love that. But the side of lawsuits and politics that come, right, because public education, schools and school systems sit in the center of the political arena, and they take different forms in different places. Like in the urban center, it's usually teachers unions and real politicians, right? And power brokers, right? So they don't even have to be elected; they just have power. Since I moved to the suburbs after living in Elizabeth for a long time, which was an urban center, and I had one of the superintendents in my school district was a friend of mine, or I developed a friendship with him over time. His politics were parents, and so and the unions at times would drive him crazy. But it was different, right? He wasn't dealing with the blood sport politics that I was dealing with. So the part that I hated the most was the politics and the lawsuits, and I share this in my book, so I'll share it now because you told me you don't get too many superintendents on here.
No, so, and I do want to talk about your book.
So in chapter 7 is called Leading with Resilience, and I lead with the story. So each chapter leads with a story, with a hook, and I tell the story of the blood sport fight between the Elizabeth Board of Education and the mayor and the senator for that, the mayor of that city and the state senator for that district. And so that's taking its form out in the political arena through elections, but it's also taking its form in lawsuits that are being filed against the school district by the board's opponents, straw people. And so you have these things going on, and so that's causing you a lot of stress, and you're taking it home and you're trying to get rid of it. But around 2011, 2012, it turned really ugly, because then all of a sudden people were actually committing crimes, and the feds and the state attorney general's office was coming in, issuing subpoenas, grand juries, arresting people, and this is all swirling around me, right? and and it's stressful enough, but now I'm scared, right? And I had to get a criminal defense attorney just to make sure I was okay. But what ended up happening was I have struggled with anxiety and depression for most of my life. I ended up having a major depressive episode.
Mm.
And in 2012, while I was sitting as a superintendent of schools, I had to check myself into the hospital for about 3 weeks. I did intensive outpatient care, I think for another 3 weeks. And then I was outpatient with a psychiatrist and a social worker for the rest of the way. So those are the kind of things that are happening to me as the superintendent. You're trying to run a school district, but you have these other pressures happening to you.
Of course.
And
It's a lot on your mental state. That's no one could really survive that. Yeah.
It killed my mental health for a while. But
Yeah.
I'm in a much
Thank you
better
for
place.
sharing that.
I'm in a
That's
much better
good.
place. And quite frankly, why I wrote that chapter, because I didn't have to share that, right? I could have just stayed educational leadership throughout. And I did a lot of crying when I wrote that chapter. And then the next chapter, Leading with Love, I did a lot of crying when I wrote that. Those were really two hard, vulnerable, raw chapters for me. But the main reason I wrote it, and I had checked in with my two daughters, my family, and said, is it okay? And they said, yeah, as long as you're fine with it. Is that I wanted to do my part, however small it is, to help let people that if you have a mental illness, it's okay. And it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to get help, right? Because we still, you go break a bone, right? Yeah, and my family has heart disease, so you end up having a clog in your heart. You have to have open heart surgery. Everybody's empathetic, sympathetic. Oh, feel better. But if you tell them you have a mental illness, that you still get shamed and taboo, right? So I wanted to do my part to start to break down the shame and the taboo, and making sure that people understand that if you find yourself there, and I write about it in my book where you can get help. If you find yourself there, obviously you can dial 988, the National Suicide Crisis Hotline, and get help. Or you can, go to your doctor or a social worker and get into therapy and get a psychiatrist so that you can get your meds. I wanted to do my part to help people understand that it's okay. And I learned that during intensive outpatient. They showed us a video, and it was a video of, I think it was like a morning news show. And they had a husband and wife on the show, and they had just written a book, and the husband had suffered from depression. And the newscaster, the host, asked him, "Why did you write the book?" And he basically said what I just said, which is, I struggled with this. People still treat it as a shame to admit it and get help. And I wanted to do my part to start to break that down. So that's why I ended up writing that book. I mean, the book goes into many more other things about resilience, but I do lead with that story and do share that I spent time there. And I do say that moment in time did break me. And don't let that happen to you. Get the help before it happens to you. But
such an important message.
So that's the hate part of the job. The love part of the job is why we go into it, right? Everything that I can do administratively through my leadership, through my vision, through my personal theory of action, then converting that into policy programs, the hiring of personnel, the development of personnel, and then ultimately having the students in the classroom with the teacher, student, and the content, the instructional core happening. That's the joy of the job. And when I can spend most of my time, if I was a superintendent on that, I probably would have been a happy camper most of the time. But that's just not the case. That's not the nature of the job, especially when you have a really large school district. I mean, if you were maybe
Yes.
just the principal of one school and you were the chief school administrator of one school, you're still dealing with the same stuff, but maybe not at the same scale.
Yeah. But your kind of leadership and what you shared, that was so personal. And thank you for sharing that in your book. um, I think is actually really important in those roles and in leadership, because I think the best leaders are the ones that are the most transparent and lead with their heart, knowing they're going to have to battle some really difficult things like politics and like the ugly side of leadership that gets thrown your way, but you step into it, and those are the kind of people we need in those positions, because you can bring that authenticity and heart to what you're needing to do. And I appreciate you sharing both sides of it, because I didn't realize all of that. I realized there was politics involved. I did not realize the whole lawsuits and fact that there could be crimes that are happening and things that, you're going to be thrown into. But I connect with your story with why you wrote your book and what you shared in your book. I just published a book this past year in 2023 as well, called The Guided Teacher, and not as in depth, but I do go into struggling with both an eating disorder and anxiety. And then during the pandemic, realizing I needed to get help and I needed to go to therapy, and how it can be hard to write about that and talk about it and then know it's in such a public forum like a book, talking about it on a podcast. But when leaders, especially in education, can be that transparent and talk about it, it only allows others to feel, I think, okay with getting that help when they need it. I think it's important for people in education to talk about the things they've gone through. We have this program at my school called Inclusive Forums, and we talk about all kinds of different things, and we get faculty and students to be part of a panel discussion. And one thing I'm trying to promote is talking about mental health, because I think even though I think we're kind of destigmatizing it in our country over time, and there's still a lot of stigma there. And especially with people like you, when you're in big positions, um, people can say like, "Oh, well, you've struggled with a mental illness." Like, it's still, I think people see it as not the same as going to the hospital or going to get treatment for a physical ailment. And I think we need to normalize that conversation. So I really appreciate you sharing that part of your book. And there anything else you want to share about the book, The Leader's Algorithm? Again, why you wrote it, other pieces in there, what you're doing with it, how maybe it's elevated you in the world of education?
Yeah. There's a bunch of questions in there, so if I don't hit them all, just remind me. But I guess, just walk you through the book uh, for you and the audience, so that they understand uh, what is the book, and why I wrote it. So the title of the book is The Leader's Algorithm, and the Leader's Algorithm ends up being two things. One, it ends up being the title of the book, but it ultimately, in chapter one, is an equation. So let me just start at the beginning. So the Leader's Algorithm, in its most basic form, is a book on educational leadership. If it gets even more basic, it's really a book on leadership. It just happens that I'm an educational leader, but anyone can pick up this book, because later on I'll talk about the personal theory of action and the framework. It's really giving leaders a leadership framework to design their strategy. So anyone could actually pick up the book. Now, most of the stories are from my life, so they're personal stories and professional stories, so they tend to lean towards educational stories, baseball stories, and family stories. So why did I write the book? If I had to use one word, it would be help. And that's actually the word I used when I pitched the book to my publisher. And if I said, if I could help one person, I would be happy. But I wrote the Leader's Algorithm to help aspiring, new, and current school administrators. And my vision for the book was to share what I learned during my 30-year journey in public education 16 years of that as a superintendent of schools, I wanted to share what I learned from my advocates and my mentors. I wanted to share what I learned from the Broad Academy because that had a big impact on how I led. I wanted to share what I learned from what I call book mentors. That's all the books and case studies and articles that I read from authors that I mostly didn't meet. And in addition, my hope is that people pick it up, purchase the book. It's on Amazon or your favorite bookstore. Get the book and create a leadership framework and strategy to lead and manage your school district. So my hope is that new, current, and aspiring administrators actually pick it up and read through it and see the value in creating the leader's algorithm and creating the personal theory of action. The second thing that has to be said about the concept of the leader's algorithm, and I said earlier, it's an equation. So in the first chapter, the leader's algorithm, I say it's a simple equation that puts strategic thinking to work. You write and you share your personal theory of action. Then you execute your personal theory of action. You don't keep it as a theory. You actually have to do it. You do it consistently with public accountability. And if you do that, then you can transform your life, your work, your schools, your school district, and relationships. And if you say it a different way, and it's captured in the book in kind of a call out box, the leader's algorithm is a personal theory of action plus execution plus accountability equals transformation. And so that's the leader's algorithm. But the heart and soul of the book is the personal theory of action. And that's really what gets played out after chapter one. Chapter one is called Defining the Leader's Algorithm. In chapter one, I teach you what a personal theory of action is. I don't leave it in the abstract. I actually share my personal theory of actions from Passaic and Elizabeth. There are in full text in Appendix A. And then I take you through the chapter and help you write your own personal theory of action. Mm-hmm. But let me help your audience understand what a personal theory of action is. So a personal theory of action is a written leadership framework, right? We all, you don't necessarily have to be a leader, but if you're aspiring or you're a current leader, we all have values and beliefs and mental models on how we think we should lead and manage, right? What I say in the book is take those ideas and put them on paper, right? And like I said earlier, don't keep it a secret, share it publicly with everybody else. So a personal theory of action is a leadership framework. It's what you can do personally and through your team to achieve your goals. And it's written in a logical chain of if-then statements mm-hmm. that lead to your ultimate goal. And usually your ultimate goal is your mission statement or you're paraphrasing your mission statement. So said another way, if we do A, B, and C, then we will get X, Y, and Z results. And my personal theory of action was the leadership framework that I used and the leadership strategy that I used to lead and manage both the Elizabeth and the Passaic public school system. And I'll give you a little taste of how mine played out, at least the structure. And if you want to know more, we can talk more. But my personal theory of action had 4 if statements, and then it had one then statement. The first if statement was what I was going to do. The second if statement was what I expected my leaders to do. And I also used that to pick my leaders when I was interviewing and recommending them to the board. The third if statement was the organizational strategies I was going to use. And what I did actually a 2 for it. In my personal theory of action, the third if statement were the organizational strategies I was going to use. But I also had the board adopt a board policy as a district organizational theory of action that matched my personal theory, that element of my personal theory of action. So not only did I operate this way, I got the board to own that part of the personal theory of action by establishing a policy. I wrote it. I had to convince them. They passed it. It gave me strength as a superintendent, because if I'm getting pushed back from the organization, the unions, the teachers, or whomever, I'm saying, well, this is board policy. I'm just following board policy. I wrote it. It's what I wanted to do anyway. But I'm peeling the onion and letting you get inside the
That's smart though. You need a buy-in.
Superintendent strategies, right?
Relationships.
So you end up, I have that as part of my personal theory of action, but then I have the board adopt that element of it, right? And then the last if statement were my guiding principles for the organization. And then the then statement was the paraphrasing of the mission statement. So that's the leader's algorithm. The heart and soul of the book is the personal theory of action. I teach you what it is. I teach you how to write it. And then the rest of the book, the next 7 chapters, are leadership topics and leadership principles and leadership lessons and stories to kind of capture that for the reader and help them turn the page, right? Why should I turn the page? Oh, okay, it's an interesting story, and I understand the larger principle, but how does that get played out in real life? And that's how the book flows.
Great. It sounds like a great recipe for like not only having a book with storytelling and, giving kind of your background, your purpose, but also like, I'm telling you, here is the steps, here's the path, because people need that structure too. So you're using a lot of, I could see your scientific mind, and also that teaching hat and your background. So you're blending the two together. And I always say to my students, really at the end of the day, every single thing we do is a science. So like what you created as an if then statement is like a hypothesis, right? Built off of like a theory. And then you go and do this in action. So, I mean, I'm seeing it all married together, and I love it. I love when you bring kind of both parts of you together in this like book and this mission of your work. And I think it's wonderful. And we need good leaders, because we see teachers leaving education. It's a reason why I started this podcast, because I really wanted to elevate the people in this work and what they're doing and their vision. And a lot of it has to do with the leadership. And so the work you're doing, the book you wrote, the work you're doing at the college level is so important. So thank you so much for sharing your story and your book. And if there's something else you want to just end with as a statement, and anywhere you want to share, like where our listeners can find you, and I'll put that all in the show notes.
Oh, okay. So I'll end with the concept of love. So the last chapter in my book is called Leading with Love. And I'll share kind of the larger concept of that chapter, which is love your students like you love your own children. So as a superintendent, I would walk through fire. Well, not as a superintendent. As a dad, I would walk through fire for my 2 daughters. I loved them unconditionally, right? So when I was running school districts, I saw in my students, first of all, I saw me in my students, right? The child of an immigrant family. And then when I was designing schools, and I was designing schools to improve the lives of the children that were in my school district, I wanted to design schools that I would want for my own 2 daughters, right? So what do I mean by love your students like you love your own children, right? Because love can mean a lot of different things to different people. But I would say that in the context of students, it's two types of love. It's universal love. So it's being selfless, unconditional, compassionate, and empathetic. And it's enduring love, showing commitment, patience, and tolerance. So if you can do those two things with your students, love them with universal love and enduring love, I think that it goes a long way in the staff, the parents, and the students knowing that you care about them. Because as you ratchet up the academic standards, and that's a form of love, right? Not giving students low-level stuff, right? Showing love by saying, I expect high things from you. And also being showing, social emotional love and compassion. If you can combine the two, you're on the, I think you're on the road to being effective. There's a lot of other things you have to do, but that's kind of that's what I would, those would be my last words for
That's
you and for
wonderful.
your
That's so
audience.
important. Yes.
For those that want to connect with me, there's a few places. I have a website, so you can find me at themuñozcompany.com. You can find me on LinkedIn as Pablo Muñoz. On my website, there's some free resources. If you want a free chapter of my book, you can go there. I have a whole page dedicated to the book. And yeah, those are the two places. My email address is pablo@themuñozcompany.com. If someone wanted to email me, on my website is also my phone number. I'm happy to talk to anybody, exchange with anybody. Actually, somebody did take me up on it one day on a different podcast. Sent me a LinkedIn message. Hey, I just listened to this podcast. You said you talked to anybody. Can we set up a time? And we did. We ended
That's
up
awesome.
talking for like an hour and a half. And this person was starting to graduate from a doctoral program and was trying to figure out what they wanted to do next. And I behaved the way Pablo Muñoz behaves. He gave me a sense of what he wanted to talk about, and I prepared for him. And we discussed what he wanted to talk about. And then I said, okay, so do you have some time for me? Do you have some time for me? He said, sure. And then I just went through all the different things I had written down in my notebook about looking into these areas for opportunities, doing this, doing that. And then at the end, he said, oh my God, because I've asked a bunch of people to talk to me. They've taken my call, but you're the first one that actually prepared and gave me ideas on what I should do next. So if anybody ever wants to just kind of talk and get some guidance, or if you want to take me up on the work that I do, which is I'm an educational and leadership consultant, which means I generally executive coach, mentor. I do leadership training in the form of workshops, seminars, and mastermind groups. And I'm also a speaker. So I've been doing some speaking on the leader's algorithm. I have one coming up soon. So those are the kind of things that I'm doing these days. I'm also working on a podcast that I'm going to be launching in a few weeks. So I guess
That's exciting. Yes.
be on the lookout for that when that comes out.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So accomplished and needed. Definitely lead with love. I love that. So thank you for ending on that note and ending with that story of actually a listener reaching out to you and being a mentor to that listener. What a beautiful connection. So thank you so much for being on the Teacher's Story. This was so enlightening. I learned so much more than just the superintendent world, but also about your leadership and your take on leadership with your book, The Leadership Algorithm, which I am definitely going to pick up and read. And I think anyone who is interested in leadership in any capacity, like you said, it doesn't have to be in education, check out this book. It will be also linked in the show notes. Thank you so much.
Jackie, thank you so much for having me.